In the evening of April 18th, 1912, the survivors of the Titanic disaster arrived in New York City and touched dry land for the first time since an event that would leave them and the world forever changed. The very next morning, the United States Senate interviewed the first witness of its month-long inquiry, an investigation meant to determine what really happened. The British Board of Trade would follow with their own investigation. Between the two inquiries, over 150 witnesses testified, and in the Board of Trade inquiry alone, 25,622 official questions were asked. A century later, we are no closer to all the answers. What really happened in the eyes of a passenger wasn't quite how a crewman would have described it. The Board of Trade did not interview a single third-class passenger, and second class was ignored by both governments altogether. Newspapers shared their own, often fictional stories, which only adds to the confusion, and 100 years of new questions, overdramatic retellings, and outrageous, clickbaiting conspiracy theories shroud Titanic in deeper mystery to this day. Mystery that, for better or worse, she has become synonymous with. Welcome to Witness Titanic, a new Titanic podcast where we ask questions just as those century-old inquiries once did. Every episode, we will interview a witness with a particular expertise in the Titanic field. Historians, authors, researchers, divers, artifact specialists, and yes, the survivors themselves will be called to testify once more. My name is James Penca. Join me in a modern look at what really happened that cold April night. I can guarantee you we will never find all the answers, but you may be surprised to see how close our efforts will bring us to Titanic herself. As the chairman of this inquiry, I say we get started. First, allow me to tell you a bit about myself. As I said, my name is James Penca. I have been a Titanic enthusiast since I was 6 years old and have been faithfully studying and researching her every fact and figure ever since. In more recent years, I have been lucky enough to work with two major Titanic organizations, Titanic Honor and Glory and RMS Titanic Incorporated. Now, due to my connections at both companies, I'm happy to say that some of the witnesses we will interview in this podcast should be pretty cool. Most notably, coming up in a couple months, RMS Titanic Incorporated is conducting their first expedition to the Titanic wreck site since 2010. So we will inevitably be interviewing some of the team from that expedition. So there is a lot to look forward to. Notice, I am a Titanic researcher. I am a Titanic lecturer. Most of all, I like to think of myself as a storyteller. I am not the final arbiter on all that happened the incredible night the Titanic went down. I will make mistakes in this podcast, and we will have guests who will be speaking freely about the things that they know, and they may say something wrong from time to time. So to the Titanic community, yes, for those of you uninitiated, there is a Titanic community, and it is a wild bunch. So I thought of something fun. I have made an email address, witnesstitanic@gmail.com. Send me your corrections, Titanic enthusiasts. When I say a figure wrong, yell at me, and I will have episodes periodically. We'll look back at big mistakes, little mistakes, and everything in between. At the end of the day, we all just want this story told the right way and be the most accurate as possible, and we will do our best here on Witness Titanic. Now, one of the best ways to ensure that the story is told the right way is to rely on the words of those who were there. That's the main inspiration behind this podcast. So I would like to share with you the first inquiry testimony of our podcast. I've chosen this one to start episode 1 because I think it's important to keep this in mind through episode 100 and beyond. This testimony comes from Arthur Rostron, the captain of Carpathia, the rescue vessel on the night of Titanic's sinking. Captain Rostron was asked during the real inquiries if he had heard any stories during the journey to New York of what might have happened during the sinking. And his response was striking. "There is only this. I know nothing. But I have heard rumors of different passengers. Some will say one thing and some another. I would therefore rather say nothing. I do not know anything. From the officers, I know nothing. I could give you silly rumors of passengers, but I know they are not reliable from my own experience. So if you will excuse me, I would prefer to say nothing." This is incredible. Captain Rostron has the opportunity to be the first person to tell the world what really happened aboard Titanic, and he instead admits that he knows nothing because he wasn't there. It's an important lesson for all of us 112 years later. You can read a million books about Titanic or watch all the documentaries in your own inquiry to determine what really happened. But if Captain Arthur Rostron knows nothing of Titanic's final hours, then we certainly don't either. Just before midnight on April 14th, 1912, Titanic collided with an iceberg and sank a few hours later. Virtually every other fact in the Titanic story requires that Rostron-like caution, a deeper look and a deeper discussion. So with all of that in mind, let's discuss. Before we bring in any witnesses, I would like to present our first question of our little inquiry here. Where did Titanic come from? We all live in a world where Titanic is so well known. It's like a timeless fable that's been interwoven into our daily lives, like a story that we were just born with. It's a story so weirdly perfect, it feels biblical, and also has themes that are so on the nose that it feels like a Greek tragedy that actually happened. So where does that tragedy begin? Now, if you've ever read a Titanic book, you may have a pretty good idea as to where this inquiry might begin its investigation, and that would be the infamous summer of 1907, where two men conceived the greatness of Titanic and her sister ships over dinner. In some tellings of the story, it's even included that they drew the first designs of the Olympic-class ships on a napkin. Well, we will not be kicking off our podcast with the famous dinner party for multiple reasons. One, as I said, let's be cautious here. We were not there. And if the napkin anecdote doesn't raise a red flag for you, I will inform you all that this dinner party story is likely just that, a story. It is legend. There is much evidence to suggest that planning for the Olympic-class ships were well underway by that summer. How this has infiltrated virtually every book about Titanic is a topic for another episode. But putting that aside, I also think we have to go further back than 1907. We have to establish the world that gave birth to Titanic and not just start with the two men who apparently conceived her over drinks. Even if they did conceive Titanic that night, why did they? If you really want to know where Titanic began, you can actually start in prehistory with the very beginnings of mankind. Titanic people are nothing if not thorough. So yes, we're going back to prehistory. For as long as we can remember, humans have had a desire to have the biggest of everything. It's just an unfortunate side effect of who we are. If we are going to build something, it should be the biggest thing. We're very predictable people in this way. Even with everything that changed following the Titanic disaster, the desire to build the largest ship in the world never wavered. To this day, we love hearing about the largest cruise ship ever made. It's been all over the news lately. So this mentality is timeless. There is no start or end date to this obsession with size, but without it, Titanic could not exist. So we already have, in prehistory, we already have our first ingredient of the Titanic story. The next stop on our marathon to Titanic is the year 1000. This is the year that Leif Erikson became the first person to command a ship across the Atlantic Ocean. Yes, hundreds of years before Christopher Columbus, thank you very much. Leif Erikson creates the transatlantic voyage. He gives us a destination. That is a very significant thing, to say the least. The next major milestone, hundreds of years later, in the year 1783, a steam-powered boat is invented. Now, steam-powered boats will not be commercially viable until 1807, when the SS North River, more commonly known as the Clermont, transports paying passengers between New York City and Albany. Clearly, this is a big moment in history that is required for the Royal Mail steamship Titanic to exist. Now we arrive at something very, very massive. In the year 1818, there was a ship called the James Monroe that did something really incredible. Around this time, sailing ships crossing the Atlantic did not depart on set schedules necessarily. They would depart as soon as it made financial sense to do so, or as soon as the weather cooperated. They would sit in New York Harbor, for example, and once they had enough cargo and mail and passengers that crossing the Atlantic would turn a profit, then they would do it. They would depart. So if you were a passenger, you would just go down to the docks and try your luck. Well, the Black Ball line of sea shanty fame announces that their ship, the James Monroe, is going to depart New York City at a certain time on a certain day. And then it departs, as promised, regardless of the financial viability of the voyage. At first, I'm sure this wasn't a great financial decision, but the idea is that over time, passengers will love the reliability and they'll love the consistency. Then the money will start coming in. And it did. Soon, every line had their ships leaving New York or Liverpool or wherever at an agreed upon time. To me, this is the birth of transatlantic luxury. For the first time, the passenger is put before short-term profits. Shipping lines will now spend money to make money. This is a game changer for a ship that is going to be built almost 100 years later, called Titanic. Now we jump 20 years to 1837. This is the most significant year in the Titanic story so far. This isn't just one ship or one event. This is a calendar year of significance. The very first thing that's worth noting about 1837, this is the year that Queen Victoria ascended to the throne, beginning the Victorian era. If you remember your Charles Dickens novels, that's where we are in history. But a few other important things happen. Notably, 3 men are born in this year that we have to talk about. The first one is J.P. Morgan. He's born in 1837, and he's very important in the Titanic story. He's very important in American history. We'll talk more about him at some point. Another gentleman is born in 1837 named Thomas Ismay. If you don't know that last name, then you definitely need to listen to this podcast. Thomas Ismay is the father of J. Bruce Ismay, the managing director of the White Star Line, the line which operates Titanic. Thomas Ismay is the reason that White Star Line will exist in 1912, and he was born in 1837. But the last gentleman born in 1837 that I'd like to talk about is a fascinating case. Some of you Titanic enthusiasts may not even know the name Johan Svensson. He was born in 1837. Johan Svensson will be the oldest person aboard Titanic for her maiden voyage. He will be 74 years old when he sails aboard Titanic. So 1837, that's kind of a year that I hold on to a lot in my research. I feel like a lot of the story really gets going that year because we have people on the earth who will be aboard Titanic. One last thing happens in 1837 that is definitely worth mentioning. In 1837, a ship is built called the Sirius. Sirius as in the stars, not the adjective. Is that what the word Sirius is? I know a lot about the Titanic. I have no space in my brain for anything else. Sirius is a 200-foot steamship. Nothing terribly special about her, but she is about to be a major player in a drama that is already unfolding. See, in 1837, steamships aren't crossing the Atlantic yet. They have always been intended for rivers and coastlines. If you imagine a ship needing enough fuel, enough coal to cross the massive Atlantic Ocean, it's going to need a lot of coal. So therefore, the ship will have to be pretty big. And to this point, it just hasn't been commercially viable yet. So your only real option is taking a sailboat across the Atlantic Ocean. It's going to take a while to get there. And depending on the weather, it could take even longer. It could be a miserable voyage. In fact, a westbound crossing from Liverpool to New York, we're talking about 40 days on average to get across the Atlantic Ocean. 40 days at sea. That is mind-numbing. But a gentleman named Junius Smith is on a transatlantic voyage to New York City, and it takes a maddening 54 days. And on this voyage, he thinks to himself, why can't a steamship cross the Atlantic? At this point, we're making ships big enough. We should be able to do it. So he comes up with an idea that if an American company and a British company team up, maybe together they could change the world and bring steam liners to the Atlantic Ocean, but nobody really takes him up on this offer. So he starts his own company called the British and American Steam Navigation Company, and they begin building the first ship in history designed to cross the Atlantic by steam power alone. Unfortunately for Junius, someone else has a similar idea, and that person's name is Isambard Kingdom Brunel, the greatest name in human history. Isambard Kingdom Brunel has a railway company in the UK, and he suggests that extending their service to the United States with a steamship. And so the British and American Steam Navigation Company and Brunel's Great Western Steamship Company begin building their ships simultaneously. It soon would become a major interest of the public, and the two companies are essentially racing to become the first to make history. Unfortunately, at some point, there are some construction issues with Junius Smith's vessel, the British Queen, and it is delayed and delayed and delayed, and it really seems like Isambard Kingdom Brunel's vessel, the Great Western, is going to be the first ship to make history. But Junius Smith is not quite out of ideas just yet. In 1838, just a few days before Great Western's historic transatlantic voyage, Junius charters the Sirius and departs for New York just to make history first. Now, I would say that's like really awful of him, but it was his idea first, so I kind of want him to win, you know? Now, the Great Western is actually designed to cross the Atlantic Ocean, so it quickly gains on the chartered vessel, and it really seems like it's going to come down to the wire to see which ship will arrive in New York first. Luckily for our friend Junius, it was his idea first, so I'm glad he's going to win this one. His ship, the Sirius, is the first to arrive after a record-breaking 18-day crossing. The Great Western arrives 1 day later after a now record-breaking 15-day crossing. This is an extremely important moment in Titanic history, and not just because a steamship crossed the Atlantic for the first time. No. Two steamships race across the Atlantic to make history. This precedent is set by these two ships, by Junius and Isambard and their companies, that chasing a speed record or being the first to do something can make a name for yourself, can grow public interest, and probably in the end, sell more tickets. This is the first transatlantic steamship rivalry. This sparks a competition that will not stop until someone gets hurt. So we now have a destination. We have steamships. We have public interest in size records, because that will always be the case. We have speed records. We even have an award now for the fastest Atlantic crossing called the Blue Ribbon. The Sirius would hold the Blue Ribbon for a day, and then the Great Western would take it, and many ships will take it after. But this isn't quite enough of our ingredients for Titanic to exist. Now, 1 year after the big drama of the Sirius and the Great Western, the British government begins giving out mail contracts to private companies. It was always a government thing before, but to stay competitive, in that sort of American spirit, they give mail contracts out to private companies. And the first person to win one of those contracts is a gentleman named Samuel Cunard. You really should know that last name. Cunard is still one of the most famous last names in shipping history. Cunard Line still exists to this day. In fact, Cunard is the only line that still operates a transatlantic ocean liner. Funny thing about Cunard, he was apparently such a good businessman that he won this mail contract while never having owned a ship in his life. He just knew, we'll get the contract and then we'll build the ships. And so began what would become the Cunard Line. Of course, it wasn't called Cunard at the time. The catchy name they went with was the British and North American Royal Mail Steam Packet Company. Now, you may be asking yourself, what does this Cunard fella have to do with our investigation? Well, 5 years later, another company is founded called the White Star Line, though not the White Star Line you're thinking of. This is the original White Star Line. They focused on the Australian trade. They would go bankrupt in the 1860s, and Thomas Ismay, born in our favorite year of 1837, purchases the right to use their name, their flag, and whatnot, and forms his own company called the Oceanic Steam Navigation Company, but this company will always be known as the White Star Line. Over the next few decades, the White Star Line and the Cunard Line will dominate the Atlantic Ocean. The luxury that began with the James Monroe, child's play to these lines. We're talking running water, lots of natural light, electricity where there isn't natural light, wireless telegraphs, swimming baths, Turkish baths, some things as simple as placing public rooms and cabins in the middle of the ship and not aft, just to make the voyage more comfortable. I mean, the White Star Line basically invented the concept of a second class. So we no longer have just cabin class and steerage. We have a second class. These companies are slowly bringing the transatlantic voyage into the 20th century. These lines would inspire an age in Atlantic travel where the journey may be more memorable than the destination. And that's just luxury. Let's talk about speed. The Blue Ribbon, for example. Between the year that the award was created and Titanic's keel laying, 29 ships would win the Blue Ribbon for the fastest westbound Atlantic crossing. The White Star Line and Cunard Line would operate 18 of those ships, bringing the transatlantic voyage down to just 5 days. Interested in size records? Of course you are. You're a human. Of the 17 ships that broke the size record during those same years, White Star and Cunard operated 4 each. In fact, Cunard and White Star are the only lines in the world by 1907 to have more than 2 Blue Ribbon winners and more than 2 size record holders. Like iron sharpening iron, this rivalry pushes the boundaries of shipbuilding and again makes the Titanic and her disaster much more likely. Now, we have one last ingredient to talk about. You don't just build these ships for records, you build these ships for records to attract passengers to make money. The last circumstance we need for Titanic to exist is an overwhelming demand for her to exist. And boy, do we get that near the turn of the century. Throughout the late 1800s, we have the potato famine and we have the general desperate life of the lower classes in Europe, causing a mass migration to the United States. We often think of these people as, plucky Irish going to find a better life where the streets are paved with gold. Well, in reality, in many ways, they were escaping their disease-ridden homeland for a chance at any life at all. That is real demand for a ship like Titanic. It's something I like to, when I talk publicly, do like lectures and whatnot. One of the first things I like to cover is when you think of the third class passenger, you really need to remove all of your social studies classes from when you were in elementary school and remove all the movies you've seen where the Irish immigrants, they just have this certain energy to them. If you really look at what life was like in Ireland at the time and other countries in Europe, it's just so much more desperate than you could possibly imagine. These people are coming to the United States not to find a better life, but to truly find any life whatsoever. It's worth noting that the total number of immigrants coming into the United States year by year peaks in 1907, the very year of our infamous dinner party, Conceiving Titanic. So in terms of demand, there could not be more of it from a third-class steerage standpoint. Now, what else is happening in the world during this historic mass migration that requires transatlantic vessels? Oh, just the Industrial Revolution that will change the daily lives of everyone in the world. Just listen to this list of inventions that would have come out in the decades preceding Titanic's short career. All right, you ready for this? The telegraph, the telephone, phonograph, gramophone, radio, modern light bulb, assembly line, internal combustion engine, diesel engine, steam turbine, automobile, motorcycle, airplane, zeppelin, helicopter, plastic, typewriter, traffic light, moving pictures, color photography, toilet paper, roller coasters, contact lenses, escalators, zippers, safety razor, cellophane, and instant coffee. I mean, the list, just this list is mind-blowing to think that in one lifetime, you are being introduced to so much. Inventions like these and so many others will literally change the world, and many of them will find their way aboard Titanic. The incredible wealth created from this revolution, along with the 1901 ascension of King Edward VII, will spark the Edwardian era as we know it. This is the era in which Titanic will be built and lost. The rich, richer than they ever have been in history, and no longer looked down on for flaunting wealth like in eras past, they are dying to spend their new money in a public way. And what could possibly be better than going on vacation where you can be seen purchasing clothes in foreign countries and wearing them aboard the largest ship in the world where there's nothing to do but promenade and socialize? Titanic was literally designed to transport mass numbers of the world's absolute poorest, and also designed to transport the richest as they show off their ungodly wealth. Again, this is all so terribly Greek tragic. And of course, all this progress, all this showing off, all these new poor workers arriving at Ellis Island in droves, it's just a confidence boost to those in power. Nothing has really gone wrong in a long time for these people around the construction of Titanic. No great wars to speak of, at least none that they lost. We even just learned how to fly. Humans are literally flying. And with the way healthcare has improved, it's not absurd to think that the people alive in the early 1900s are thinking, man, we could be immortal soon. And now you're saying we could build an unsinkable ship? Regardless of where or when Titanic was conceived, it wasn't just to break a record. It wasn't just to make money even. Titanic was conceived because all these very specific circumstances throughout history required her to be. Size, luxury, speed, competition, demand, confidence. These circumstances feel like a perfect storm that is rivaled only by the perfect storm that will eventually sink her. In the next few years, the usual events that you will read about in Titanic books will take place. In 1902, JP Morgan forms the International Mercantile Marine, which uses the White Star Line as its flagship company, which basically makes White Star Line an American company all of a sudden, which really freaks out the British government. The Germans are also suddenly very good at building ships. That's not good. So the British government gives a loan to Cunard to build the largest and fastest ships ever built to sort of, retain that national pride and that security. And so Cunard builds the Mauretania and the Lusitania. You've likely heard of those two ships. The Mauretania and Lusitania deserve their own episodes, of course, but you may know those names for two famous reasons. Lusitania, very, very famously, was torpedoed and brought the United States into World War I. And the Mauretania is mentioned in one of the greatest lines in the 1997 film. Yes, I'm not above talking about the 1997 film. It is one of the greatest movies of all time. You would be a fool to not talk about James Cameron's Titanic. When Rose first gets out of the car and we get that beautiful reveal with the hat, and she says, "It doesn't look any bigger than the Mauretania." And Cal, played by Billy Zane, the greatest performance in cinema history, says she's over 100 feet longer than the Mauretania and far more luxurious. Iconic. Billy Zane, greatest actor of our generation. So Cunard builds these two legendary ships, Lusitania, Mauretania. They are the largest ships in the world, and they are the fastest ships in the world. In fact, they are only the fifth and sixth ships in history to hold both the size and speed records simultaneously. And by all accounts, they are the most luxurious ships in the world. So they are the triple threats of the Atlantic. And so with their rivals having basically dropped the mic in a very big way, the White Star Line must respond. And they do so by conceiving, over dinner, maybe, probably not, Titanic and her sisters. And in 1908, construction begins. That is where Titanic came from, and that is where we will adjourn for the evening. In the next few episodes, we are going to start interviewing witnesses who will be telling us a bit about their expertise in the Titanic world. We will even interview some survivors, and by interview, I mean we will be diving into their testimony from the actual United States and British inquiries to get a modern look at their experiences. Thank you so much for joining me for this first episode. This podcast has been a long time coming for me. It's very scary to step out like this, but big thanks to RMS Titanic Incorporated for giving me a little nudge, and I hope that you have all enjoyed this so far. We will reconvene next time with our first witness, the only person you could ever begin a Titanic inquiry with, and that is the managing director of the White Star Line and surviving first-class passenger, Mr. Joseph Bruce Ismay. I will see you then.